Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and we are going to be talking about lots of issues, especially in terms of something that has affected not only the state of Texas, but might affect the nation, and that is this ruling coming down on sanctuary cities. But also, I'd love to get the comments from both of our panelists here around the round table about this decision that came down in an election in Pennsylvania 18th. So we've got a lot of things to cover, and we will certainly, as we have time, work our way through many of the articles we've posted on the website. Benny Dexter with me as always, and Debbie Georgiadis, host of America Can We Talk. So thank you both for being here today.
Well, you're welcome. You know, I don't know if you guys ever watched the singing contest show, The Voice.
Mm-hmm.
So it's back, you know, and they're getting their crop of singers. And one of them, a lot of them are Christians, or they're, you know, they sing in churches,
yes.
And they grow up learning music that way. And so this one said that his mom was actually a Christian rapper, and the mom was on because sometimes they do little spots with the families. So she was a rapper. So it kind of, you know, reminded me and made me laugh when one of our stories for today, and I think we may take this on a little bit later in the program, was about somebody who I've greatly admired, Christina Hoff Sommers.
And you've interviewed her. We've interviewed her.
We've interviewed
yes.
her,
Mm-hmm.
and she is great. She talks about, well, we'll kind of explain this, but the Wall Street Journal piece about her is the gender gauge rap is real. And I thought about Christina, who's probably close to 70, rapping up there on a college campus.
It's supposed to be wage gap, but they got the gauge rap. And
they were
Debbie,
the protesters.
Debbie, you read this and said it was one of the funniest articles I've sent to you in some time.
Absolutely. In fact, that story, and maybe we're going to go into it right now, but what's so
might
funny
as well.
was...
We're here, so let's do it.
So Christina Hoff Sommers, was speaking at a law school, and there was a protest that started right when she began. But what I was wondering from the article was, this student dashed to the front. She's wearing a jacket that says "Stay Woke," and she's reading things off her phone to get the crowd to chant and repeating her. So the chants were "Microaggressions are real," "Black Lives Matter," and then the gender gauge rap is real. And what I wondered is, did the audience, did these people who were repeating, did they chant?
They were probably rapping. You know?
I wonder if they chanted that, or did they go,
They
wait,
probably
what
thought
did she
it
say?
was gauge.
And they probably did not even know. And I appreciate this piece that she has actually written, and we do have that up a little bit later. You can find it, because she didn't expect this. This is at Lewis and Clark Law School. Now, truth be told, I've spoken at a lot of schools, and I've spoken at Lewis and Clark. I've spoken at OSU and a number of other Oregon schools. Lewis and Clark is a little more on the liberal side. It's not Reed College, which may be the most liberal, University of Oregon. But nevertheless, she said, you know, they're law students. Usually law students are a little less rambunctious. That's one term you could use, or maybe a little more focused than maybe undergraduates, but it didn't make any difference. Even though some of the law students maybe were cordial, there was the same kind of greeting that she has received that almost anyone else has received, and points out that, guess what, Charles Murray, who has received some pretty negative ones, is going to be showing up very quickly at one of the universities, Florida University of Miami. So we'll see what that brings in the next week or so.
She had a speech prepared, of course, and hardly got to give any of it. It was mostly just answering questions. And, you know, it's really sad to me that kids at the, you know, that by the time they've reached the college age have not been taught the civility to welcome someone who's come to speak for you, that it's all about protests, especially things like this, because, you know, they have no clue what they're even protesting about. They're parroting talking points.
Well, I love the content of the note she received. There were several leftist groups that demanded that she was invited there by the Federalist Society, demanded that they disinvite her, and the expressions they were used about her was, about Christina Hoff Sommers, was she's a known fascist whose speech would constitute violence against victims of gendered oppression. I mean, these people live in a bubble. They're just in a bubble. And these are law students. I mean, they're supposed to be studying things like the meaning of free speech in the Constitution, the meaning of robust debate. It was just astonishing. And the other really disappointing factor about this was that the school, Christina Hoff Sommers, wanted to continue giving her speech, but the school intervened, said, no, just hurry up and let's get to Q&A. And then later, when she had an assistant with her who was videoing all of this, that the school tried to, so the video went out, lots of people saw online how the school handled it, and the school put out a statement saying essentially that on March 5th, Christina Hoff Sommers was disrupted by a few protesters at the beginning of her speech. After a few minutes, she was able to continue, and students engaged in vigorous discussion. And that, according to Christina Hoff Sommers, was not true.
The thing I appreciate about her, and I remember the reason that you and I interviewed her many years ago, was because she is a feminist in one sense, but she is a feminist who tries to keep the feminists honest. And so one of the ways she has done that over the years is to explain what's been called the wage gap between men and women. And she's explained it, very well and in various ways in books and articles and in her speeches over the years. Because a lot of college kids are unaware, I guess, that there really isn't a wage gap between men and women if you take all the material factors into consideration. And so, they're messing it up by calling it the gender gauge rap, and it's so great to see that they just don't even have any clue what they're talking about.
And let's give credit where credit is due, because when you did the interviews, we actually did some articles that people can still find out. I think we put some of them still on the Probe website. I don't know if they're still on the Point of View website, on feminist myths. And she took on all sorts of other feminist myths, like that more women are beat up, are actually face domestic abuse during Super Bowl Sunday than any other time of the year, and a variety of others. And of course, those don't have a public policy implication. They're just myths that get perpetuated by feminists. But this wage gap is really important, because a couple of years ago, we almost had what was called comparable worth, that we shouldn't just have individuals that receive equal pay for equal work. We should have equal pay for work of comparable worth. That would have been a disaster. That would have turned over to bureaucrats to decide what everybody gets paid.
Yeah, who gets to decide what is comparable exactly? And, there's another source. This is a great topic for all of our listeners to understand, that this wage gap, it is a real galvanizing calling. It's a galvanizing slogan for young voters, young women voters, used all the time to make them feel, to paint the picture of America and corporate America, business America is deeply unfair to women. And there's another source that was independentwomensforum.org has data all the time up. They take the latest employment data to make the point, yes, and to shorthand it, yes, we pay brain surgeons more than bartenders because it's more valuable. And when you take out all your, as Penna was saying, if you equate equal education and equal jobs, women are and men, the wage gap disappears. And in some instances, women are actually paid more than men. In like college professors was one example, where the similar tenure and topic and the kind of college, women are actually paid more. But the entire thing is a myth, but it's a rallying cry for the angry left.
Yes. And she also wrote the book, The War Against Boys. Remember that one?
Yes.
Because, we've been talking about how women are being discriminated against. Well, on the university, look at this. Yeah. I mean, more girls graduate from high school, more girls graduate from college, more girls, women now, graduate with graduate degrees from
law
school, everything, and yet we are still talking about how this patriarchy is hurting women. And again, there may be some other closed doors and glass ceilings, but most of them have been opened and broken a long time ago, right?
Well, I love feminists who actually try to keep the feminist movement something that's actually telling the truth and honest. So many people won't identify with it anymore because it's gone so off the rails.
We'll spend a little more on this since we have two articulate women here, so we'll get into that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Harvard University placed a Christian group, the Harvard College Faith in Action, on administrative probation because they pressured a female member to resign in September following her decision to date a woman. Andrew Walker, writing in the Weekly Standard, makes the issue very clear. He says Harvard is disciplining a Christian student group for the group's expectation that its students' leadership follow basic Christian ethical teaching on sexuality in accordance with Christianity's 2,000-year-old doctrine on such matters. This is not the first time a university has asserted its right to tell a Christian group what they can and cannot believe. You might remember the case that came from Hastings College of Law at the University of California. The Christian Legal Society required members to subscribe to a statement of beliefs and refrain from certain prescribed behavior. But the university had a policy that required campus groups to accept all students regardless of their status or beliefs in order to obtain recognition. Of course, there are some differences between these two cases. The Christian Legal Society wanted to have members agree with the basic tenets of Christianity. The Harvard group merely wanted members to refrain from sinful behavior. The Christian leaders made this important distinction. They said, "We reject any notion that we discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation in our fellowship. Broadly speaking, the student in this case was removed because of an irreconcilable theological disagreement pertaining to our character standards." Once again, we can see how universities try to maintain the pretense that they are dedicated to diversity and tolerance until a Christian group tries to maintain some ethical standards for members and leadership in a Christian organization. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment, I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG. Now playing. More information at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, it is our weekend edition. If you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Let me mention you can also, of course, watch this program on Facebook Live, and you can leave a comment there. I'll be glad to read that on the air. And we ended up starting out with Christina Hoff Sommers. Now, if you are not familiar with her, you can go back in some of the archives of Point of View and perhaps even find some of the interviews we've done. You can find many of her articles, but works with the American Enterprise Institute. And I guess that's why she gets labeled, because when you go to the same institute as Charles Murray, who is, obviously labeled as a fascist, there you go. Although I remember one of my professors, Jean Kirkpatrick, was at the American Enterprise Institute. I remember going over there because she was not only my professor, but we worked on other projects. And I say, it's pretty diverse. Obviously Heritage Foundation is more conservative, and maybe some of these other think tanks like the Brookings Institute more liberal. AEI, it's kind of all over the map, but it's almost like as soon as you have a woman who comes from the same institution as Charles Murray and then actually has raised some questions about some of the statistics like the gender wage gap, or what was called the gender gauge rap, you immediately get these people holding posters. But Penna, I'm just not so convinced that any of those people had read any of her books or articles.
I doubt it. One more thought about that wage gap. And, if you look at two people, for instance, maybe two doctors
Yes.
that work for the same medical group or hospital or whatever. And then, the woman, I've noticed a lot of female doctors who work like 3 days a week, and then they raise their kids. Maybe
Right.
they deliver babies,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. They're not going to be at the same point as the doctor who is dedicated full time every day on call, all the time, they won't be at the same level, but they're choices women make because guess what? Women have babies. Women are moms. That's part of most women's life experience. And so, the money, and they make the choices. So it's not really the idea that the woman herself is mad or angry because she makes less than the man. But when they look at the stats and they look at the numbers, you have to factor out for those things, for time spent away to, have a baby or raise kids. All of those things figure in, but when you take it out, there's very little difference, if any, between what men and women make, as Debbie just said.
Yeah, the other thing just quickly is I think it's so unfortunate to use the false data that makes it just to take the absolute data and not dig in underneath it, because it ends up telling women that your place in society and politics is as a victim. You're a victim, and so that's kind of your mentality going forward. And it deprives women of intelligent conversation. And actually, the staying home with your kids is one thing. Women tend to be caretakers. More women than men are going to stay home and care for their senior parents. And this is a beautiful thing about life. Men and women are not the same. And if women want to do that, which is which many do, of course you're not going to be as experienced, have tried the same number of cases or done the same number of surgeries, whatever it is. And we should just accept that and be grateful that we have a society with the freedom to make those choices.
Can I mention your book? Because Ladies, Can We Talk? Didn't you have some of that in there? And that book is still available, isn't it?
Yes, it is available on Amazon. Ladies, Can We Talk? And I did talk exactly about this issue, that it's important to insist on facts and don't get pushed around by slogans.
And I did find the old Feminist Myths article. It used to be on Point of View, but I know it's still on probe.org. And you can look at all of them. I was reading them during the break to you ladies. Some of the comments, and Christina Hoff Sommers, you got to appreciate that. On a lot of issues, we would theologically and politically disagree with her, but I always appreciate somebody who's honest with the facts, and she has dug into some of these myths, these cliches, these statistics, and said, fellow feminists, this is just not true. You got to stop saying it. But so far, she was saying that in the 1990s when we interviewed her. Here we're in the 21st century, and we're still hearing some of those slogans.
Well, I learned something new this week, and that most of the women that voted for Donald Trump did so because their husbands and their sons.
I know.
Well,
that's a good point.
You two men, your two husbands forced you into this, right? I wondered if we were going to get to that one today.
I'd love to talk about that one today.
Go for it.
Jess, I was going to say this was I'm sure our listeners heard, but Hillary Clinton making a speech in India made that accusation. She's still explaining why she didn't win the 2016 presidential election. And her new point was that many women, especially married Republican women, voted for Donald Trump because their husbands told them to do so, or other men in their lives. She even said sons, bosses. Yeah. And just, first of all, what an insulting statement to women in America that you can't think for yourselves. Surely, and also just what an arrogant statement that everyone who'd be well informed would want me. So if you didn't vote for me, obviously you have a horrible influence in your life, pushing, getting off on the wrong track. It's really, I crossed the line with her this week, and for the first time, I honestly feel kind of sorry for her. I mean, she's belligerent and accusatory and all those things she's always been. But she cannot grasp what happened in the 2016 election cycle. She can't understand why people rejected her viewpoints and her potential presidency and chose Donald Trump. So she's still grasping for reasons. She's just lost.
Well, and I'm noticing now, see if around the table you agree, that a lot of Democratic leaders are starting to distance themselves from her and from Nancy Pelosi. And a good example of that, we'll get to in just a few minutes, is the Pennsylvania 18th, because you have Connor Lamb, who ran as kind of a rhino almost as a Democrat. I mean, on a lot of statements, he was Republican, but he was saying, I would not vote for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker. That's not necessarily something a typical Democrat would do. But I think there is a sense, especially among the younger ones. He's 33 years of age, so he'd be perfect around our millennial roundtable if it weren't for some of the views he holds to. But many of the views, he would just be in lockstep with all of us around the roundtable. Nevertheless, he's just simply saying, it's time for some of these older women to go. And Hillary Clinton has become, I think, a little bit of an embarrassment now to the Democratic Party, don't you think?
Yeah, I read today that actually one 88-year-old member of Congress did die, Louise Slaughter, and her death was reported. And, it made me wonder. I mean, I'm sad for her family. It did make me think, though, about someone still serving in Congress at that age. And really, I mean, in most careers, you just don't perform quite as well when you get to be that old. I can't imagine anyone serving till they're almost
Can't imagine somebody in the
years
Supreme Court
old.
serving when
Well,
they're in their 80s.
that too.
Well,
I know people
wait a
just
minute.
hang on. It's not like we don't have lots of new blood and new talent in our country to draw from. So it just seems like a lot. And I will say sometimes when Nancy Pelosi speaks, you do kind of think she's not quite as sharp as maybe she once was, and starting to think that about Hillary too, Debbie.
Oh, me too. I'll tell you, Patty Solis Doyle, who was at some point during Hillary Clinton's campaign, she was a campaign manager. She was interviewed the same day that statement went out to the public, what Hillary said in India, and she was very firmly denouncing Hillary. She said she should never have said that. She's out of line. She is not speaking for the Democrat Party. We don't talk that way. She was very firm. This is her own former campaign manager. So that is someone who was willing to speak. I'm sure in closed Democrat circles, closed door meetings, they're just thinking, can someone please find her a job or something? Just get
Find her a cause.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, again, that's just something to think about, whether that's going to have an impact. And since we have some more issues to address, a couple I want to put on the table for the next half hour. And one of those, of course, is what happened in Pennsylvania 18th. This is a more conservative, a Republican district. This was actually at one time Rick Santorum's district. Now, I mean that generally because this has been a district that's moved around so much. You might remember last Saturday, Donald Trump had to remind some of the people that they had a vote coming up on Tuesday because some of the people did not know they were in the 18th district because it's moved more than many other districts. Some of us in the state of Texas, we say, pretty much the 3rd congressional district looks exactly like it did 20 years ago. The 32nd looks a little different, but still looks a lot like it. And yet over there, this one was moving around a little bit. So
It's going to be gone by next year.
That's right. He's going to be a man without a district. Yeah. So we'll see how that one plays itself out. So that's one thing. And, of course, we also have the decision coming down here in the state of Texas about sanctuary cities. So, as always, we have lots to talk about. And if you would like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Perhaps you have some comments. Feel free to leave those on our YouTube channel later, but if you'd like to leave them on the Facebook Live right now, we'll certainly try to read those and give an answer to those as well. Penna Dexter, Debbie Georgiadis in studio, and let me just mention we've got a couple of articles, one of which, of course, we mentioned, and that is the one that is about Christina Hoff Sommers, the one that she wrote, which, again, is just so creatively titled, The Gender Gauge Rap is Real. And it goes on for 2 pages from the Wall Street Journal. And then we will also be getting back to one that comes from the Resurgent about sanctuary cities and a couple of other issues on the table. So if you'd like to join us, that number again, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to get some of the articles, we have posted them today on the website pointofview.net. And my commentary today is about Christian ethics at Harvard, in which Harvard University placed one of the Christian groups on probation because they believe the Bible and want to enforce it, which will relate to a little bit later some of the conversations we have about an Ohio student who was suspended because he did not walk out during the gun control walkout, and another student that was kicked out of class for telling a professor, are you ready for this? There are only 2 genders, and he got thrown out of class. So lots happening, and we have a lot to cover. We'll do that right after this.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment comes I Can Only Imagine. The untold true story of Mercy Me's Bart Millard and the power of redemption and forgiveness.
My dad was a monster, and I saw God transform him. I didn't think that God could do that.
I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Now playing. More information is available at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
When you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living on a different planet from those presenting the headlines? We've always known there was a subtle bias, but today, it's about as subtle as stepping off a 1,000-foot cliff. The only way to counteract that bias is with the truth. To join the Truth Team at Point of View, your support will educate and encourage potentially millions every day. Don't let lies win. Step up so that lives and our nation can be changed. Join the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penedextra, David Georgiadis. And let me just mention that we want to spend a little bit of time talking about this special election last Tuesday in the 18th District in Pennsylvania. This is a district that has been Republican. It voted in significant percentages, and we can give those to you in just a minute, for Donald Trump. And it has been a district that has been Republican until Tim Murphy had to step down. Go all the way back to Rick Santorum. That was his district when he was a member of Congress. Now, let's be honest, Conall Lamb didn't exactly run away with it when there were predictions he was going to win by 5 points or more, which shows how flawed the polling is. But more importantly, there are at least some that are trying to say this is evidence of a blue wave. This is the end of the Trump dynasty and all of the rest, and it's bad news for the Republicans. Penda, let me come to you first, because I got the feeling that around the table, not everybody's convinced of that yet.
I'm not convinced of that. I will say anytime you have a loss where, especially this was a district that Donald Trump won by 20 points, anytime you have a loss, then you have to look at it and find out if there are lessons to be learned. And there were a few that were pointed out. For instance, the quality of candidates. I mean, Rick Saccone, I think is the way we determined you pronounce his name. Perhaps he wasn't the most dynamic candidate in comparison to the young, handsome Marine who ran against him. And we have to look for really good candidates to, going forward, I think, for some of these seats. So that's one. And, I don't think we take things for granted. We don't assume that because we passed a tax cut as Republicans, no Democrats voted for the tax cut. We do have to remind people of that. But that's not going to carry us. There have to be a lot of reasons. So I read Newt Gingrich and Karl Rove, with those warnings, we got to pay attention. But then there's some other things, and that is that this Democrat basically ran as a Republican. He did not ever say anything against Donald Trump. He during the campaign, he knew he couldn't. That would have been dumb. He said he's voting against Nancy Pelosi as Speaker. He's pro-life personally, although he believes a woman should have a right to choose abortion if she wants to. I don't think that's pro-life, but in my definition of it. But he ran that way because there are a lot of pro-life Catholic Democrats in Pennsylvania,
sure, as
we've known throughout history. So a lot of reasons, and he's a gun guy. I mean, he's a Marine.
First commercial. He's got an AR-15 in his hands. Never seen that before.
So in one sense, it doesn't tell us a whole lot about the future, I don't think. But I do think that, we have to be very intentional about about the 2018 election and pay attention to the candidates who run and, fund the good ones, fund the districts that are winnable and all of that. So, it's not, we're not going to coast to holding on to the House.
Yeah, these 2018 midterms are just we're going to be talking about that until the day before the midterms, because we have the American left is just determining this blue wave is coming and that this unpopularity of Donald Trump is going to sweep out all sorts of incumbent Republicans. And I think the U.S. House there is some concern that the majority could switch to Democrat, and that would be, very typical and given where we are now, because we have a Republican president, House and Senate. So that is the common thing in the midterms. But having said that, Donald Trump is astonishingly popular, given that he is the recipient nearly daily of negative news coverage. And there are estimates by serious news sources, like 80 or 90% of the coverage of him is negative. So all of that is the Republicans have to recognize we're fighting to tell what our agenda is, and we're kind of got to be talking over the media. But on the ground in Pennsylvania 18th, there's just a need for, I have worked on a few campaigns. You have to connect with voters, and you have to be willing to you have to, and dynamic is one word, but you have a certain percentage of voters are going to vote straight out Democrat no matter what. Or others vote straight Republican no matter what. But there's a wide swath, and they're not necessarily always politically moderate or neutral, but they kind of look to a person. They want to feel like this is someone I trust, I can relate to this guy. The Republican candidate did not appear to be particularly relatable. He didn't have the points that Karl Rove was making about being able to connect to your district, your constituency. You have to know your constituency and what pushes their buttons. And I don't know. I'm disagreeing with Karl Rove's opinion, which was when Donald Trump came and did a rally that really hurt this Republican candidate. I mean, he can say it seems proven, but I don't think so.
Don't think so.
I think
might help the other way. Got people out that didn't even know that Rick Saccone was running. Yeah. Who knows? I just think
there's a need for energy, passion, and clarity on behalf of candidates in this election cycle. Just just energetic presentation, and it is a tough thing. I mean, politics sometimes do come down to appearance. Young, handsome guy, former military, everybody loves that, certainly on our side, on the conservative side, and a guy who just was kind of lackluster. And so maybe that's all this means, but Republicans do have to recognize we have a big uphill battle to hold on to the House in 2018.
You know, I do think it's kind of funny when they talk about the anti-Trump vote. Well, in this case, this doesn't support that thesis at all, because Trump was popular there, and this candidate had to avoid criticizing Trump as he campaigned. So, but there are 70,000 more registered Democrats in PA 18 than Republicans. And so the fact that the race was close in one sense speaks well for the Republicans. So this race is, it's a race. You learn things, but it's not the race that's going to determine the blue wave, quote unquote, blue wave.
You said something else, and that is usually you have to wait till a census to change the district. But because this one has been in the courts, let's give you a little bit of history. Up until a few years ago, Democrats basically ruled in the legislature there out of Harrisburg. And so nobody had any questions about the gerrymandering that was taking place there. But a couple of years ago, as we announced here on Point of View, Republicans took over in the legislature, and so they began to gerrymander it in the other way. Well, then that led to a court issue, and so as a result, as you mentioned a minute ago, Penna, he's going to be a man without a district, and he'll have to run in some other district, might even be forced to run against someone else that's a Democrat. So we'll see how this plays itself out. So that is one thing to keep in mind, even when you look at this. This may be a very short-lived blip, and I doubt you're going to get Connor Lamb clones running in too many other districts around the country. This may be just one of those exceptions that people will look at right now and make it as best a footnote in history.
Well, Connor Lamb didn't have to win a primary. He just went directly to the election. And so in one sense, when you have a primary, that's when you have to go left, because your primary voters are going to be on the left. Right. And so he didn't have to do that. So
again, there are just a lot of issues there. But I'd also like to, while we're looking at Pennsylvania, since our listeners here are in the state of Texas, there's something else, because Democrats right now are saying, hey, with the blue wave is coming. I got a feeling that the Democratic Party just wants to spend an enormous amount of money on Beto O'Rourke to try to unseat Ted Cruz. I just don't think that happens. They're going to pour an enormous amount of money, I suspect, into the congressional race with Pete Sessions in the 32nd district. And maybe that one wins the Democrats over. But I just got a feeling there's just going to be a lot of money wasted because some people in the Democratic Party feel like this is their year. What's your thoughts?
Oh, they really do. As to Texas, maybe we'll continue this after this break, I'm not sure. But sure. As to Texas, there was during the primary, and if you didn't know, in Texas we had 2 weeks of early voting, and then we had primary day. And so during the early voting, we had a massive Democrat turnout. Numbers kept coming out and saying the Democrats are really wound up. But getting around to primary election day, the Republicans, who tend to vote more on election day than early voting, as compared to the Democrats, really turned out. So it was a huge turnout in Texas on both sides. Ted Cruz, the current Republican senator who's been challenged by this Beto O'Rourke guy, Ted Cruz got more than twice the number of votes that Beto O'Rourke, more than twice. And so I think the Democrats have to always say we're coming after Texas, but I think when you look at the outcome of the primaries and who won the primaries, it wasn't just that Republicans had a big turnout, but the conservative Republicans tended to beat the moderate Republicans, even taking out incumbent Republicans. And I think there's just the notion that Texas is turning soft. Watching what Nancy Pelosi does in Washington, I don't think so.
We already had a Democrat leader in Joe Strauss, who was headed up the House and kept some of the common sense legislation bottled up. So the conservatives in our legislature here in Texas never even got to vote on it. He's been doing that for, legislative session after legislative session, and he's finally stepped down. I think he's seen the power of the conservatives in Texas. So, Texas is not going blue. I mean, again, you watch. I mean, in the community I live in, big companies are moving in from liberal places. So you do watch and you do try to influence. But I don't think that we should wring our hands about a blue wave.
Well, we'll come back and get into that a little bit more. Debbie mentioned some of the incumbents that were unseated. That doesn't happen very often. Let's talk about maybe why right after this.
Washington Post columnist wrote opposing columns last week on Down syndrome babies' right to life. The title of Mark Thiessen's piece is, "When Will We Stop Killing Humans with Down Syndrome?" Ruth Marcus called hers, "I would have aborted a fetus with Down syndrome." Ruth Marcus said she had 2 babies. If amniocentesis had revealed Down syndrome, she would have aborted, grieved the loss, and moved on. She condemns laws that prohibit doctors from performing abortions for the sole reason that there's a Down syndrome diagnosis. Ms. Marcus says that advances in prenatal testing pose difficult moral choices, but it's still none of the state's business. Mark Thiessen writes that in the U.S., 67% of Down syndrome babies are aborted. This rate, though high, compares favorably with European countries. A CBS News report last year revealed Iceland's near 100% abortion rate for unborn babies with this genetic disorder. Denmark is close behind at 98%. In countries with socialized medicine, cost is a huge factor. A person with Down syndrome is often deemed too expensive. Mr. Thiessen advocates for a different view in this country. He describes the testimony of Frank Stevens before a House Appropriations panel. Mr. Stevens stated, "I am a man with Down syndrome and my life is worth living." He encouraged the lawmakers, "Let's be America, not Iceland or Denmark. Let's pursue inclusion, not termination." There are signs this message is gaining traction. The Gerber baby for 2018 is a 1-year-old with Down syndrome. The company chose Lucas Warren out of 140,000 entries for his glowing and giggly smile. Indeed, a 2011 study by Harvard University showed people with Down syndrome have unusually high rates of happiness. 99% said they are happy with their lives. And surveys show they bring great joy to their families. We need a culture that welcomes the Down syndrome child. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in his weekend edition, Penna Dexter, Debbie Georgiadis. We were talking about, of course, what happened in the Pennsylvania 18th, but let's talk about here in the state of Texas. And Debbie, I know that essentially since you do a local talk show, you focus on it more than any of us around the table, but I've noticed a couple of examples. And when we had Jonathan Saenz on the other day, he mentioned a couple of races, Jason Villalba and Lisa Luba Ryan, and then we also talked about Bob Hall and a few others. So talk about some of these local races, because I think it proves that these social issues actually are winning. And if you actually go against the social issues, sometimes you lose in the primaries. If you support them, you win in the primaries. True?
Absolutely true. The one race you mentioned is a Texas House district, and the incumbent was Jason Villalba, HD 114. And I would say I think he had served 3 terms. He finished out 3 terms. Some things he had done, even though his line about himself was I'm a Reagan conservative, but what he took some positions that a lot of conservatives were troubled by. One particular one had to do with the bathroom bill, or as the conservatives try to call it, the women's privacy bill. The notion that, and just how that got started was a high school principal in Fort Worth simply announced that transgender students could use whichever shower they chose, that they agree with their self-identification of their gender. And so that was the springboard for the Texas legislature saying, no, we're going to have, men's room and women's room. We're going to protect the privacy of women in high school and other public restrooms. So that bill came to the floor, and that was one where the incumbent, Jason Villalba, really mocked it. In fact, I went to a debate even during this primary, mocked the idea that it mattered that you would protect women's privacy. Another bill that I thought his position on really was just a window on his thinking related to, you probably, wherever you live, you have, when you go to get your driver's license, you can check off that whether you wish to be an organ donor in case you were to lose your life in an accident, we want to be an organ donor. And the position that he had taken, Jason, was that there was the presumption would be you will be an organ donor unless you happen to notice you can check off and not become one. You put the impetus on the individual to opt out, and it sounds like a minor difference, but it's kind of a presumption of the state controls your body, not you. And we tell you, unless you're smart enough to figure out what we're doing, you don't get to opt out. And there are a lot of other factors. There always are in races. The challenger in the primary, Lisa Luby Ryan, is very engaging and charming, but she also worked really hard, talking about the personal aspect of campaigns, knocked on doors, talked to people, called people, and just kind of reconnected. And I think there was a feeling of and she's very strongly pro-life. She has a testimony on I Am Second relating to her journey on that issue. And I think that really appealed to people. Just honesty and commitment to conservative social values really resonated. And this district, generally speaking, is known as kind of being more moderate. It's not one of those, heavily socially conservative areas, but I think her genuineness and her ability to speak well about those issues really resonated.
Penna, one of the things that some people pointed out is the so-called privacy bill or bathroom bill. It was one of the propositions on the Republican ballot. I think all of us voted for it. Well, more than 90% of the Republicans voted for it. They had a higher turnout and a higher percentage for that than even things like overturning Obamacare. This seems to me that at least for the Republican voters to be a big issue.
Yeah. Now, I may be wrong about this, but I was under the assumption that it was never on the floor of the Texas House, that it was because if it had been, it would have passed.
Right.
I mean, is that right?
I actually don't know. I think that's right.
Okay.
But I'm
well. Anyway,
sure.
So it didn't.
Yeah.
It didn't get there.
Yeah.
Because it's really popular in Texas, as we found out because we put the resolution on the ballot this time, and 90% supported it. So Texans still have a lot of common sense. We get that there are two genders, male and female, and there's not this big ability to move your gender and change it, although some people get confused. And so I don't want to be unloving towards transgenders, but we don't change our laws because some people are struggling. We keep our common sense laws. We keep our view of science. It's a battle that's, really basically gone across the nation. I'm grateful for people like the Heritage Foundation PhD, who's written a new book about it. I think, have you interviewed
Ryan Anderson?
Ryan
Yes.
Anderson.
When Harry became Sally.
When Harry
Yes.
became Sally. We need some common sense out there. But in Texas, we already have it. And so, it's good to see these contrasts, I think, made. The fact that we voted for the resolution. We've finally gotten rid of the guy that was really bottling up some of this common sense legislation. So hopefully things will move forward in Texas.
Just again, for people that haven't figured this out, we've said that at the national level, the very good legislation passed by the House goes to die in the Senate. But in Texas, it's just the opposite. Good legislation in the Senate goes to the House to die. But with a new Speaker of the House, maybe that'll change. What's your thoughts?
Oh, I think it definitely will. I think part of what, and maybe all of our listeners are aware of this, but part of what occurred under the previous Speaker of the House in Texas was he is a Republican because there's a Republican majority in the House, but he originally got elected by getting all the Democrats behind him, all elected Democrats and a handful of Republicans. So he really was more loyal to the Democrat side all through his tenure as Speaker of the House. And he managed to perpetuate that several election cycles. So the conservative majority, the Republican majority, was not picking the Speaker of the House. That is now changing. And so the Republicans are going to choose in their own caucus, their Speaker of the House, and then they are bound to make that same vote once the legislature is all together. So you'll have a Republican chosen by the Republicans heading up the Republican majority. And what that speaker did, by the way, he just would send bills to committees where we have in Texas, amazingly, we allow Democrats to chair committees, even though Republicans have the majority, send bills to Democrat-chaired committees because he knew the bill would never get out of the committee onto the floor.
Well, speaking of one bill in Texas that actually did pass, We did pass a bill in the last session prohibiting sanctuary cities in Texas, and of course it was under immediate court challenge. And this week was some good news that a federal appeals judge ruled that most of this law outlawing sanctuary cities within our state can be implemented while the legal challenge continues in a lower court. So we still have to have it ruled on the actual law, but it is good news, and it's certainly good news for the security and safety of Texas citizens.
Well, again, I've always heard people say we need sanctuary cities because we have individuals that will be deported when they shouldn't be. And, of course, the classic illustration, I'm going to give credit here to Andrew. He dug this up a while back. You saw the story about Miguel Perez, who had served 2 terms of duty in Afghanistan. And how in the world could we send him back to Mexico? Until you read the rest of the story, he actually had just finished a prison sentence for drug possession and conviction. He actually his friend had provided free drugs and alcohol. He actually handed a laptop case containing cocaine to an undercover officer and pleaded guilty to a drug charge and served half of those 15-year sentences. And, oh, by the way, he did serve in the military, and he was actually drummed out of the military because of drug issues as well. So this is a good example. And, again, Andrew, thank you for digging those kinds of things up. It just illustrates, again, that when you see it in the news, check it out, because it turns out the story was a little more significant than we might have thought.
Yeah, I love this Fifth Circuit ruling on the Texas sanctuary city law. One is that should be common sense, but the Fifth Circuit did say, actually, as it should be, immigration policy is a matter of federal law, period. Yeah. You can't, because what sanctuary cities are essentially saying is the city governance, or in, say, the case of California, the whole state, they have primary right to determine immigration law. They're saying we supersede the federal government, and you can't have a country if you don't have the one federal government in charge of immigration policy. So they talk about both that, and then also the states, though, have the right to, pass laws but they can't be inconsistent with the federal law. I hope we go back to this after the break. I can see I've got to go to break.
We certainly will, because after all, the Attorney General has sued the state of California, and we're going to look at that. We haven't even talked about the Oakland mayor in a while, so it might be good to get into that issue of sanctuary cities and a lot more. So we'll do that right after these important messages.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school, until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.